But yeah, when we come to employment and jobs, before we even talk about pilots, like full pilots that can do your job completely independently, where we are right now, I've got a great example from what my granddad told me when he was a kid. He was a farmer, left school at 14, was working on a farm. Tractors then became a thing suddenly. And essentially, he was asking people, saying, am I going to lose my job to a tractor? And one of the guys came to him and said, look, you're not going to lose your job to a tractor. You're going to lose your job to the man who can drive a tractor. Right. So learn how to drive the tractors. He stayed in farming throughout his entire career because he learned how to drive tractors. And other technology that came through into the farming industry, he made sure he stayed up to date to use that. It's the same thing in the industry that we're in now.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi there, everybody. This is Mark Verbenkoff, and welcome back to the FutureTech and Foresight podcast. This is going to be episode number 153, and today we're talking about a topic that is a little bit more, I guess you could say, relevant for me personally, and hopefully, actually I know it's going to be relevant for some of you. It's about managing remote or distributed teams. So, as I've mentioned maybe once or twice on the podcast before, almost a year ago, I set up I guess you could say smaller, or it's a startup. It's a small consultancy focused on the AI revolution, while also incorporating a little bit of digital marketing that some of my clients needed. And I have a growing team that is fully distributed. So today's episode, which I have an expert guest come on to talk about how to actually manage remote and distributed teams. It's very relevant for me, and as I mentioned, I already know it's relevant for some of you. So it's quite interesting to have Glyn Roberts, my guest, on today. I'll talk about Glyn in a minute, but I want to say a little bit about the episode itself. So we are going to be talking about, how the pandemic also, I guess you could say, helped or facilitated this transition towards distributed teams. Of course, some of the benefits and challenges of having a group of experts that are spread across the world rather than in the traditional office setting. We do talk about some of the tools that are available out there. And then, of course, as is the topic du jour, we talk about how artificial intelligence is impacting and changing how distributed teams are managed. So I think it's a pretty, obviously it's an interesting episode, but I think it's also a very relevant one that doesn't just talk about, interesting things that are going to come out in the future, but it's actually something that's relevant today for all of us. So with that said, I'll introduce my guest and then we can dive right into the discussion. So Glyn Roberts is the CTO of Digital Solutions at Vention. He has over 20 years of experience in delivering software projects and leading technology teams across the UK and Europe. He possesses deep expertise in various technology stacks, cloud solutions, and distributed team performance strategies, which is of course relevant for today. He is a renowned for his advisory roles, and Glyn frequently serves as an engineering advisor, interim CTO consultant, and mentor for diverse tech companies. He's also an active member of CTO Craft, the founder of CTO Portugal, and a podcast host. So thank you very much for listening to today's episode, and hopefully you guys get some benefit as much as I did from the conversation with Glyn. Perfect. Well, hi there, Glyn. Thank you very much for coming onto the podcast today. As I mentioned just before we started recording, I am very much looking forward to the discussion topic today, as it is very personally pertinent, but I think it's also going to be relevant to a lot of the kind of entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast as well. So thanks a lot for coming onto the podcast and sharing your time and insights into this new kind of interesting world that we're moving into.
Yeah, great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
With how you got in what you're doing today. So was there kind of like any specific event, like maybe the pandemic, that made you move a little bit more towards into helping understand like how distributed teams and the technologies involved in making those teams function properly, or was there just kind of a natural progression in your history that led to this?
I would say it's a natural progression in my history. I've been working in the tech sector for 20 years now. Most of it has actually been in digital agencies like I am now. And during that time where you are dealing with lots of different companies, different engineers, either based at the client's location or internally in-house or wherever they may be, just naturally, as I've matured and moved up in my career into higher level positions, I've worked in other companies that have distributed teams of engineers based in other locations and other countries. So probably about 13 years ago, I'll probably say, it was the first time I was having to deal with more of a global team where they are actually based in other locations. The first one was mostly UK-based engineers, but then some Polish engineers. I moved out to Portugal where we did the same type of thing where you got engineers based in multiple different cities. So, and then obviously the pandemic came along and now suddenly it became much more prevalent to have remote working or hybrid working. So therefore the tool set's already set up. So therefore, wherever the engineers are, it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting the output that you expect. So yeah,
Right.
so it's just been a natural progression of my career, to be honest.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And maybe from that, like the previous companies that you said that were doing these, I would say innovative ways of working before the pandemic, were they more forward-thinking type businesses, or were they kind of forced into having these globally distributed teams? Because to my mind, I think that the pandemic just kind of forced us upon everybody and made everybody realize that, whether you want to call it remote teams or distributed teams, like that's kind of necessary. But the companies that were doing it before the pandemic, was there kind of a thread that kind of, connected them all together? Were they similar, like the CEOs or the board, were they like similar do they have similar thoughts or like ways of perceiving the world?
I mean, the main purpose before the pandemic was twofold. One was the perceived cost savings that you could have by having your team based outside of the UK. Being UK based, engineers here are more expensive than you would have in other areas, say Europe, Eastern Europe, and out into Asia. The second one is actually getting access to certain talent because just inside the UK, like I live in London, there's some great talent here, but they all get snapped up. Like the really good guys get super snapped up by the big corporations, the FANGs, and now we've got, the AI world, which is now snapping them up. So being able to access like a certain quality level that may not be local to you just opens up more opportunities to have a better engineering team inside your organization to help you work, let alone the aspect of also having like a larger support period where if they are based in Eastern Europe, they're 4 or 5 hours ahead of you. They start earlier in the morning, so any incidents that may occur, there's a team already officially working without having to have an on-call rota cover those periods. So yeah, essentially the initial purpose was cost savings and access, but since the the pandemic, it's still some of that. The cost savings aren't there as much as it used to be, 5, 10, 15 years ago, which I can talk about a bit more. But the access to talent is still there, and that's what people are mainly looking for.
Interesting. And were these companies, from the sounds of it, they sounded like they were larger companies. They weren't just some smaller startups that were just kind of getting their feet off the ground. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
Yeah, I mean, before the pandemic, smaller startups would normally have everyone in-house, like close to them. I think that's sort of changed now. But yeah, so originally before the pandemic, when I was doing this with organizations, they weren't huge. We're talking about 30, 40 people engineering teams, so not massive numbers. But still enough to say, yeah, 5, 10 engineers based in another location, you can see the impact that it would have on the team as an output overall.
Right. So it's only like a small fraction or 10% or something like that of the workforce that would be distributed. Everybody else would kind of still be in-house in the main location, if you would.
I would say so. I'd say the percentage has changed quite a lot now for organizations that are able to manage a remote team, a distributed team. They do go more heavier towards other locations now than they would have done previously. But yeah, previously it was, you still have your core team in-house and you have extensions outside of your location where you're based.
Very interesting. And I guess with all of this, I guess these companies have had to face a number of different kind of challenges. And I think that that's something that we definitely need to touch on. So is maybe the question is, have the challenges changed since the pandemic, or are they still the same kind of challenges with working with a distributed team over time?
I would say a remote or distributed team shows your management failures. With a team all based in the same location, you can have a lot of failures in the way that you do work and the way that you communicate and the way that information is passed and teams collaborate. When you go into a remote world, those issues become much larger, much bigger. They're not as easily fixed as they were previously, where the guy could just come tap you on the shoulder, or you see at the water cooler over lunch.
Right.
So I'd say the understanding of how to run remote teams, and since the pandemic, there's been so much education and information out there to actually spot what these challenges are and be able to fix them, and how to go about managing your team. It's much easier than it was previously, where you only had a much smaller number of organizations working in this way to previously.
And I also would assume that the amount of tools, like actual like software tools or systems in place back then would have been significantly less than now. Like it seems, I'm on the internet all the time. It seems like there's a new tool, whether it's a Slack alternative or Trello or some sort of, project management tool that's popping up every month, right? That's enabling XYZ more benefits to teams. But maybe that wasn't around back then, or they had to build it in-house.
Interestingly, a lot of these tools did already exist. I mean, what was it? Before Slack, Windows had Yammer. I don't know if you come across that, but
it sounds familiar, but I don't think I ever used it. Yeah.
Exactly. There's Yammer. There was Skype. You could do this on. Obviously, Skype's not a great choice because it's hard to validate who you're actually talking to, because you can put any name you want in there. So the tools are getting better for enterprise, I would say, but there were tools to actually make this work previously with like ticketing systems. Your ticketing system was always going to be online, be it Jira, Trello, Notion. Well, I think Notion's a bit newer in the current world. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely easier with better tooling, but there was tooling existing before that sort of died out and been replaced by the new wave of tools. And essentially the pandemic pretty much helped determine who the winner was. Essentially Zoom became so big where most people never heard of it or used it before. It became big because they were essentially installing their own server on your computer. They shouldn't have really been doing that, but it made it much easier for you to connect and utilize the tool. So therefore, that's why they got a lot of market dominance. I think that dominance is starting to drift away now, but initially you saw an awful lot of spikes in a few sectors like Slack and Zoom.
And I mean, one of the things that was that we communicated about before is like these larger technology stacks, right? So maybe you can touch on that, or rather the architecture of these technology stacks, right? It sounds like as the number of remote teams is growing, and maybe the actual number of people in those remote teams per the different companies is growing themselves, the amount of tools that is needed to make these teams work is also growing. Could you touch on that for us?
Tools that you use, essentially you need the process and the criteria around utilizing. That's what's more important. So yes, there are more tools available. I mean, recently we've moved much more into the Microsoft stack setup. So therefore you've got Microsoft Planner as a ticketing system. You've got Teams with your chat and your video calls. You've got Docs. You've got Microsoft Copilot now to do summarization and tie this all together. There's some antitrust issues around with that organization, but essentially it's not always the tooling that makes things more complicated. It's the expectation management and understanding when you can and can't, how you should use these and where you can and shouldn't use them in certain cases. Especially with distributed teams, time zones suddenly become an issue. Essentially, you can't just message someone expecting an immediate response if their time zone is different to yours. They'll have their lunch at different periods. They'll start their working day differently. And that, and obviously you've got the cultural aspects as well, where certain countries like to start earlier in the day than what your normal working hours would be. So setting expectations of core hours, of where meetings are suitable to be scheduled, and working more asynchronously to make sure that work is not held up because you're not available. So, but yeah, essentially there are more tools available, but again, it's the process, the management piece that needs to be in place. So everyone's on the same level, understands what the expectations are. And I'd say expectations and communication are normally the two biggest fail points when you are working with a distributed team. If those two are fine, everything else normally goes quite smoothly. They work it out. But if one of those two is not set up correctly, but even over communicating is a negative and can really harm the productivity of a team. So yeah, if those two are dealt with, life is a lot smoother for the way the team works and the expected output that would be from that team.
And are we seeing that like people are getting a little bit better at doing these things? Like if for instance, when I was working in Barcelona, I worked there for about 7 years, and we had another office that had been set up in another country, but we didn't really have to interact with them. They were kind of their own independent team. I had never really worked in a distributed team until I started my own business and needed, some help from other countries. And I was trying to impose my management style of working in an office to a distributed team. So there was certainly a period where I needed to learn some different techniques, or like really understanding that, yeah, okay, I can send a Slack message now, but it might not be responded till, the next morning for me or later on at night because of those time differences. From the work that you've done, have you seen that there are maybe already people that have worked in these distributed teams, and that there's more knowledge and awareness or best practices that can kind of get filtered throughout an industry because people have had these experiences? Or are you finding that people need to kind of like learn this from scratch kind of all the time?
I would say that the existing knowledge now is much greater than before the pandemic. When the pandemic hit in, I mean, I was involved in an awful lot of webinars. Everybody was watching webinars in our industry, and we were covering every part of how to deal with a remote team, how to deal with distribution, along with the other challenges that were going along in the tech industry. And those conversations and webinars and education is still being taught today. And the generation that's coming up now from the engineering perspective, they've mostly already had these type of interactions with teams. They've seen the way organizations are set up, so therefore they know what is expected when they go into a new organization, of going, well, you haven't got expectations of core hours, of when we need to be available to make sure, synchronous conversation can take place. What are those? And then it highlights to the senior management that may have not done this before, oh, that makes an awful lot of sense. So yeah, I think there's less of having to start from scratch than it was previously. But of course, there's certain, you have both extremes. You have the older generation that insists on being on site. This is the way we do things. I can't get anything done without it. And then you also have a younger generation that are still a bit new, green around the ears, that are having to learn it from scratch, which is obviously nothing wrong with that. It's just making sure you know where to look, where's the right resources to get up to speed about how to manage your team. And when it comes to that, there are, a few very good resources out there. GitLab, Remote Teams course material. I think they even give you certification from it. That's a great one. You've got Team Topologies, which talks a lot about, blocking teams and, how you deal with communication, and temporary topologies and flows of how you need to change your structure of the team depending on what activities and projects that you're working on. So it's that twisting the mindset a little bit to fit the way that you need to work as an organization. There's not one size fits all, unfortunately. So therefore, it is always an adaptation. So any company that you go into, you have to still adapt what you've learned from the past. You'll know some core framework and structure to follow. Doesn't mean that's exactly how it needs to be.
And maybe we can also touch on some of you touched on it a bit at the beginning, like other pros and cons of having distributed teams. So you were mentioning the fact that, of course, sometimes it's a little bit cheaper for organizations to have distributed teams, maybe less so now, and maybe you can touch on that now here. But also, this is something that I certainly experience all the time. I set out a list of, tasks to be done, go to sleep, wake up, it's done, and I have to follow up on it, right? So the churn of the business can continue kind of without sleeping, right? Without stopping, if you will. Are there any other things that, say somebody who's listening to this, who's thinking about starting a business or just has started a business, wants to work with a remote team, and they're starting to think like what are the pros and cons of this?
Sure. So right now let's quickly just touch on what the current challenges are for startups. The expectation is you need to change the model to what we were dealing with 2-3 years ago. Previously, it was about scaling. We scale. We bring in funding. That lasts 18 months. You need to spend that money in 18 months because we're going to do another round of funding and keep on scaling that way. The VC money's dried up. It's not where it's going. The VC money's all getting pumped into AI at the moment. So, and obviously a few other areas like fintech and places like that. But yeah, the money's not as free and easily accessible, especially with interest rates globally becoming much higher. It's a much more risky prospect where interest rates are zero, practically zero. It makes sense to make these bets in a lot of areas to gain the profit from that. So you need to do more with less. And having a remotely distributed team is one of those options available to you to be able to achieve that. AI is another one, which I'm sure we'll touch on later.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on it.
Yeah, but having a hybrid remote team is definitely giving you some form of cost savings on how you do it. It also adds more complexity. So the big thing is the complexity that you add. So each country has its own HR regulations of how you deal with employee management. There are all companies and tools online to help you do this for you. They'll deal with the HR, they'll deal with the employment law, they'll make sure that it's clear what they can and can't do. And when you ask for overtime in certain countries, it's illegal. So therefore you need to be fully aware of that. I was working in Portugal and the rules changed while I was over there. So yeah, there's a whole host of little hornet's nests that you could fall into that you may not be aware of. So therefore you'd want to be making sure that you're utilizing a tool or platform to help deal with the HR business management side outside of your day-to-day platform building. With being able to do more with less, this remote aspect then covers the big issues, like I mentioned, identifies big issues like time zone differences, cultural barriers. Essentially, that there can be quite a few there. I mean, essentially, if you're a gaming company, certain like more Muslim-focused countries will refuse to work on gaming-based projects. So therefore, you need to be aware that that's going to be a limitation to your resource pool if you're trying to hire someone for a gaming company in an area that's heavily Muslim, or other faiths as well, of course.
Yeah.
The communication piece, so people's first language will not be English, that'll be their second language, so therefore we need to be aware of that. And then obviously being able to manage the team, do the one-on-ones, make sure you can understand where they're coming from. Essentially, being able to relate to engineers that are like you. They're based in London, they live down the street, they watch the same football match as you. Very easy to relate. In a completely different culture, completely different environment, that becomes a much bigger blocker to have to overcome, to build that trust, to build the relationship, especially as you go out to Eastern Europe. You've got to ask them like 5 times before they tell you what they really think. Essentially, they don't want to be a downer. They don't want to give you any negative information or comments. You've got to like really dig it out of them to say, how are things going? What can I do better? Oh, everything's fine. Okay, you have to push to get something out of them. Say, oh, everything's fine. I'm fantastic. Okay, right. So, do you want to marry me then? I'm that great person. You got to joke around, try and get them to loosen up, and then start telling you what they really think. Because you need the honesty to make a business work, to understand where there are improvements to be had inside your organization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those are all some of the things that I mean, not gaming, but certainly some of the issues that I've experienced as well. But it also, I think it makes it a little bit more interesting, right? Like you also get to understand, I mean, from a personal level, maybe not, focusing on the efficiency and the actual benefits to a company, but certainly on a personal level, like you understand a little bit better a different culture, a different way of thinking, different lifestyle. I love traveling, and I'm not traveling to these countries that I have some of my staff on but there's certainly some connection that you get with people, and you understand a country that you've never been to. So that's maybe a little bit more of a softer benefit, but maybe not super relevant, but interesting nonetheless.
I mean, look, there's a lot of benefits to that, what you mentioned there. So us as an organization, if any of our clients want to go out to what the locations of our engineers, we'll have our travel team support arranging that for them. Because, it's not their language, it's not their currency. They don't know how to move around or what the expectations are. Having that, being able to go out and see your team face to face, even if it's only like once a year, there's still value to the face-to-face interactions, even though you are effectively working well in a remote capacity, because it just gives you that extra level of confidence and faith and understanding of the way they are. Especially if you go out into certain locations like Europe, they'll want to go out drinking and do shots and all that. You got to clear your level, make it clear how far you're willing to go and stop at that point. But yeah, it's a good way to build the relationship, especially if you plan that this remote team is going to be a long-term investment into your organization.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. Okay, great. So moving on, I was actually just having a conversation with an older family member 2 days ago about the shift in technology, like the I guess you could say the large shifts. So from like, you know, older calculators to a personal computer to CDs to like the cloud infrastructure. Like I remember, I'm almost 40. I remember a time where I was just using CDs all the time for gaming, maybe when I was a younger teenager. But then like realizing like, oh, like CDs, I've been only using them for a couple of years and now they're already obsolete. Like it was quite a, I don't know if it was a profound shift, but it was certainly like, you know, you're aware that things are changing so quickly while you've been using something for a couple of years now. Um, One of the things that we communicated about before was this cloud infrastructure, and you mentioned Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Office to start us off with. Are there other types of cloud infrastructures that I guess like remote teams have been using more so than anything? Zoom, you also mentioned that would be relevant to bring up in this discussion.
Yeah, obviously ticketing systems to understand what you're working on, but I'd say the next valuable piece is a wiki. And that can be anything. You know, it can be Microsoft SharePoint, it can be Notion, it can be your own little hosted free open source wiki that you found, a centralized documented location where information can be clearly shared across everybody inside the business. There's so much value to that. We're constantly putting effort into improving our wiki with some of the new initiatives we're doing. We're making sure all of that goes straight into the wiki so everyone has access to it, can see it. We talk about it. So that communication aspect really offers a lot of value to everything that you do. And, you know, when it comes to developers, you can put your coding standards in there and then people can comment on it and, you know, have discussions from that perspective. So wiki is one of the big ones. And yeah, essentially that deals with the communication piece that you need. So as long as you've got the video, the text chat, the wiki, and then some form of project management tool, be it ticketing systems or whatever you're looking to use, running any type of platform project should be enough there. Obviously, you can go further into, you know, observability, into the way that you run your architecture and all that, but obviously that'd be very custom depending on what type of organization you're running and what type of uptimes and SLAs you need to meet.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Just on the point about the wiki, one of the things that I've personally been finding very useful is creating like video tutorials, right? So if you have a wiki where it's a lot of text, as you're saying, some of your team members might, you know, English might be their second language. So it makes a lot of sense to create, and it's time consuming, but I think it's very valuable to create these you know, shared screen tutorials of how the work process or the workflow actually works so that they can constantly refer back to it. And if you need to change a team member, then you just send the video to them, the video tutorial, and they're able to move on.
I mean, you're right. That is absolutely great. The problem is data like that goes out of date very quickly. So you end up having to re-record and redo these things. So if your team's small or the number of changes that you make on a regular basis aren't that high, then it absolutely makes a lot of sense. Or if you've got enough of a team back, you know, space to be able to do these for you, that's fantastic too. But suddenly it's like your tools change. You now need to re-record all the videos that mention that tool. It now becomes a scaling problem for yourself to obviously having to do that. So what we've been doing, especially for keeping up to date with things like AI, you know, I'm only generating a very small amount of internal AI training. I'm mainly leveraging existing AI training that exists on the market. So I'm breaking up saying, right, look, if you want to be level 2 at this, these are the expectations of what you need to do. Here's a load of resources and links straight out to resources that are doing this for me. So especially with the AI world where the information is changing very regularly, you know, 6 months later, likely you have to throw that away and find another one. If I'm able to utilize free resources to ping that through and say, here you go, that keeps you current, it's much less workload for me in those type of circumstances. Obviously, when it comes to internal processes, it's going to be hard to find an organization that matches exactly what you're doing. But if you thought, you know, but maybe there's something that you can reference there as a way of working. But, you know, you are right. The language barrier can be an issue. And I'm thinking maybe AI tooling is going to become one of these things. I know OpenAI is offering Sora as a video creation tool. So maybe if you start throwing your wiki into Sora and it's just going to generate video-based content for you, makes it even easier. So therefore, there we go. There's a business right there. I think we've just created.
Right. Well, I'll have to get on that. With the other 1,000 things that are on my to-do list right now as well. I didn't ask you yet about what exactly you guys are doing with your company. Could you give a brief summary before I definitely want to get into artificial intelligence, but I think it's relevant to talk about exactly what you do before we jump into maybe the more interesting stuff.
Okay, it's not always an easy way to explain it. So we're a web development agency, 3,000 plus engineers based across 12 different countries. So, very distributed. We've got New Mexico out in the US. We go all the way out to Uzbekistan on the other side. And then in the middle, everything we can get, like, Kyrgyzstan, a lot of EU countries, Poland, Georgia, what was the thing of Slovakia, Bulgaria. So yeah, essentially very distributed engineering teams there. Obviously, we've got UK based, US based, and EU based sales, and like some technical people like me, and like technical directors that work for me to advise, to do the advisory side. And the majority of our work is staff augmentation. So therefore, majority of our clients have their own local team, or maybe their team's already distributed, and they're utilizing us to scale up, to handle larger roadmap, larger workload, and standardly 2.5 years is the average length of period that we work with an organization.
Okay. Well, that's a long time. Yeah.
It is. So obviously the way we're structured can get quite detailed. Essentially, we're broken down in not just countries, but also like units inside countries. So therefore there's, leadership inside, support levels in place, mentoring, management, training, happiness managers, a whole host of different things. And we have offices in all these locations as well. So some engineers work from home, some engineers go into the office because they want that connectivity, that personal touch. Even maybe nobody around them is actually working on the same project as them. Just by having that face-to-face capability can be very valuable.
Very interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it would have been like 2.5 years. That's quite a lengthy period of time. But I guess if you're scaling up or helping to scale up a large company, that they would need a substantial amount of time to do that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, we don't tie them into long periods, of course. It's more of a case of most organizations, especially at this point, they're scared about hiring full time. Because if you have to hire full time, then potentially in 3 months, 6 months, you might need to sack them because you just literally can't afford them anymore. Yep. It's not just the cost, it's the guilt of hiring someone and having to get rid of someone. They're a lot less guilty by utilizing our engineers because they're all full time. If they get removed off your project, we'll put them on another project. So the guilt goes away, along with the fact that we've got excellent engineers and all that stuff.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I also feel the exact same thing. When I first started out, it was utilizing a lot of freelancers, and it's like, look, I want to give you a full-time job. I love working with you, but I don't know if this business is going to work out, right? It's like month 2 or something like that. So it makes perfect sense, and it does really help to scale up, right? You can offload a lot of, or you can unburden a lot of work while continuing to grow things. Shall we jump into artificial intelligence?
Oh, let's do it.
Yeah.
The topic everybody loves and everybody hates now.
I mean, it really is that. I just gave a speech a couple of weeks ago to a lot of people who had never, several of them had, but many had never even used ChatGPT once. And one of the main messages that I think people are starting to understand, and certainly the ones that I push, is like you should be fascinated and terrified at the same time of this technology. But let's get into it. So. You mentioned Microsoft Copilot. I've been using something called Fireflies, which I think is like Otter.ai, which is a meeting summarizer. The amount of tools that are coming out is just exponential. And now these like larger cloud platforms are starting to integrate artificial intelligence into kind of everything that they offer. Could you touch on, I mean, I definitely want to hear what you think about what will happen, but what is happening right now, apart from this integration? How is AI transforming these distributed teams?
So I'd say this gets covered in 2 parts. So the first part is co-pilots or virtual assistants. So you've got things like GitHub Copilot, Code Whisperer, coding co-pilots, which will help you pre-populate code, and utilize that to make you more effective as an engineer. You've got similar things for managers with summarization tools. I missed that meeting. What's the summary of it? What are the key action points? Bang, there you go. So these have an awful lot of value to you to improve the way you work, to improve how much you can get done in a day. If I've missed an hour meeting and I only need to spend 5 minutes reading a summary of it, that saved me 55 minutes. That's an awful lot of improvement to do there. And then even when it comes to writing documents, writing emails, or just trying to be creative, I use ChatGPT to be creative if I want write about something, or it gives me the ideas. I never just use the content copy and paste because it's poor, it's clearly written by ChatGPT. But to unblock you, it's a really great tool to utilize to make that your life easier, just to get the juices flowing and your mind thinking down a certain path. The prime example is I had 2 days off at the end of last week, came back, Microsoft Copilot. What did I miss over the last 3 days? Gave me a summary of every message, meeting, email that came up, and said, right, these are the things that mentioned you in it, Glyn. This is what's happening on with this team. It's like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I still go through and check my emails to make sure I haven't missed anything else or anything like that. So I don't trust it completely. But it's great just to get a sense and a view from that perspective. Second piece of it, it's either internal or external tooling. So being an organization looking at the internal tooling piece, there's an awful lot that we can do. And this is what we're spending a lot more of our time on with our clients, on how to improve their operational efficiency. So RAG solutions, retrieval augmented generation, where, if I've got a question for something, if I need to ask a question and the person that knows the answer is, in another time zone, and I have to wait till tomorrow before I get an answer, or disrupt everybody by doing an at channel message, that's taking you out of your flow, taking you out of context. Where an internal AI tool, which understands all the knowledge that sits inside your business to give you those answers. What was the revenue last year? What does our bench look like? That is an amazing tool that gives you the information so quickly, which would have normally taken 3 days to go, what was the revenue last year, to go to the finance team. The finance team has to go to operations to confirm, make sure it's valid, that we can share this information, yada, yada, yada. So that is just one piece of that I think is going to incorporate it more into organizations. So Microsoft Copilot is trying to do that automatically. Other organizations that's not using that, maybe building it internally. They're very easy things to build in a simple way, in a demo way. When you want to get into like serious production level, things get much more complicated, but getting going is really simple. But analytics of how well your team's performing, or making your management flow much easier, essentially identifying there's tickets behind, this person hasn't been contributing to this, they said they would, there's so much that could do there. And then the second piece is externally. So, customer support. Klarna is the key client the key company anyone talks about at the moment with their chatbots. They've cut 70% of their chatbot staff by implementing their own chatbot, of their own support staff, by implementing their own chatbot that supposedly offers a better service than the internal employees. The feedback is better from the chatbot than the people. So obviously they can't deal with all use cases, but that type of operational improvement offers a lot of value to companies. And as I mentioned, getting rid of staff because these AIs are there. Just to be clear, I would say that companies always spend the money they've got. Essentially, just because they save money in one area, that operational improvements have happened, doesn't mean that money's now just going to disappear. They'll then invest in something else, and then in something else. Essentially, it allows the business to work. It allows the business to grow and to be more effective. So the whole scare aspect of I'm going to lose my job due to AI is not really true, I'd say. But as we look into the future, I can talk a bit more about that.
I mean, that is obviously one of the big concerns, right? At the speech that I gave, for instance, I spoke to a number of people before and after, and there was typically it's either the first, second, or third questions, like, okay, well, what about my job? Right? If the conversation is, well, this is what's happening now, as you just outlined. Well, what's going to happen in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, right? 5 years, not to say 10 years. I think I started off the podcast with saying, well, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? And now it's, anybody's best guess. Things are moving too quickly. But yeah, this aspect of whether people are going to get augmented or automated, I think is such a key point, because if you are perceiving the future as, well, I'm going to get automated, my work is, relatively routine, and we all know that AI does great with routine tasks. Why should I be motivated? Why should I be, focusing on this? Maybe I need to change my entire sector, my entire industry. So yeah, I think this concern about the technological unemployment is very real for people. Now, whether it actually turns out, or as you're saying, there's more of a augmentation of the workforce that happens, and the business shift money into, growing in different aspects, I think has yet to be played out. But I think what we're seeing right now is definitely an augmentation, right? Like I use ChatGPT, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20 times a day, and I'm trying to get my team to use it as many times as a day as I am. I think it's just one of a toolbox of things that we can use that are just massively amplifying the efficiencies that we're having.
Yeah, I mean, when you are recommending your staff use these third-party AI tools, definitely check the data protection, privacy policies, and stuff like that. It's very important. We still don't know exactly how open AI work, for example. So I'm still very skeptical. Yes, they've come out with their policies say if using our business account, using our APIs, we don't train the data on your model. It's like, great. What about your login? What about your caching mechanisms? Essentially, we don't know how they work. So therefore, there's still an aspect of black box where there's a trust aspect there for me. But yeah, when we come to employment and jobs, before we even talk about pilots, like full pilots that can do your job completely independently, where we are right now, I've got a great example from what my granddad told me when he was a kid. He was a farmer, left school at 14, was working on a farm. Tractors then became a thing suddenly. And essentially, he was asking people, saying, am I going to lose my job to a tractor? And one of the guys came to him and said, look, you're not going to lose your job to a tractor. You're going to lose your job to the man who can drive a tractor. Right. So learn how to drive the tractors. He stayed in farming throughout his entire career because he learned how to drive tractors. And other technology that came through into the farming industry, he made sure he stayed up to date to use that. It's the same thing in the industry that we're in now. Yes, we're going to have a lot of operational improvements where you may not need a large team of a certain role, where one or two people could achieve it, as you say, in an augmented manner with an existing AI. But if you understand how these AIs work, what they can and can't do, understanding what the red flags are, that's your value to the business. You're now pumping out an awful lot of productivity by working alongside the AIs from that perspective. Even if we do go down the pilot route. So let's say hypothetically, like Devin was the well-marketed, this is your developer, you tell it to build a website, it'll go away and build a website. It hasn't really come to fruition yet, but is that a possibility, let's say 3 to 5 years? Even if it is, they don't just have to solve the coding problem, they've also got to solve all the other problems with it, with discovery, understanding what the client actually wants, how to test it, how to deploy it, how to react to certain situations. So there's an awful lot to achieve to get to that point. And if that does become a real thing, the barrier to entry to create a new website, to create a new platform now suddenly drops hugely lower, which means that industries that are not tech enabled, that do not use any technology, are now able to move into this space. And that now opens up all the other new jobs that we'll expect in this sector. So I wouldn't say it will be a net negative of people losing their jobs due to AIs, even if a full pilots exist. I would say that's still going to be positive, just like we've seen in other industrial ages and other advancements that's happened in modern society. I mean, when Excel came along, people that used to do tables and charts manually, the accountants, that they'll probably be very concerned their job's gone. No, now we can actually, do things a lot faster and pay an accountant only an hour to do my entire year's reports instead of before it would have taken him weeks. So there's a lot. I'm very optimistic about the future and the value it's going to bring to us. But the concern, of course, is there that, if people are not trained and given the materials they need to adapt to it, they'll get left behind and find it incredibly difficult to get a job or career moving forward. So that's one thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that last point that you mentioned is absolutely key, and I just want to highlight it: the need for people to continually learn. Right, there needs to be training. There needs to be this. There's this term about continuous education or continuous learning, because if AI is going to be expanding and improving at the rate that everybody, Sam Altman and all Elon Musk's and these other people are saying, if the rate is actually going to be exponential, well, the churn, I think, is a good term that you're saying about, the barrier to entry of many businesses is going to be dropping, and that offers many new opportunities, but those opportunities require a different skill set. So if you're not learning new skills all the time, you might not be fully irrelevant in your industry, but you might be not relevant in a new industry or in a new position that you could put yourself in. So this need to, whether it's taking courses or fiddling around and trying to like test out some of these new tools. Like if you're not using ChatGPT, I would say at least once a day, you're probably already falling behind. ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, whatever one of these chatbots. It doesn't necessarily matter, but I think that one of the things that if people only listen to the end of this conversation, it's start learning about how to learn and start using these technologies as much as you can so that you can stay relevant in the coming years. It's your grandfather and the tractor idea all over again.
And just extend on that a little bit as well. So I've been in a few companies where the engineers say, I want training, and they expect to have the training paid for them, the time off for them to be able to do this. Training is your responsibility. Companies are only ever going to train you for what they want you to do inside the organization. And therefore, if you've got a view of where you want to get to, what you need to learn to stay ahead, you need to go do this on your own. Yeah, great. There's a lot of organizations out there that offer this training, offer you the support and direction. If they're not offering it, you still need to do it. You still need to go out and get that. Otherwise, you are going to fall behind and be much less able to be hired in future. So it is still your responsibility. You can't just say, my company doesn't offer training, doesn't give me a training budget, therefore it's their fault, unfortunately. So, I mean, people that get big in the industry pay for their own training, pay for their own books, do whatever they need to do to try and stay up to speed with what's going on. And I know time is an issue, especially those with families or other commitments. Fitting it into your commute, wherever you can do is the best that you can do for yourself to at least keep on progressing. Little bits every day makes a world of difference in your knowledge. Yeah,
completely agree. I also think that maybe if there are some people listening that are like hesitant to this idea of like, oh, I have to take a course, or, I didn't like learning in school and I got out of school and now I'm working and I don't have to learn something new in a different way. I think that one positive idea is that this, especially the relevant skills and tools, which is going to be like prompting and understanding how to use AI over the next couple of years, it's incredibly exciting, even if you don't come from a tech background. Once you start to understand what these tools can do now, I mean, just now, not even talking about 5 years from now, I think that it's tremendously inspirational and motivating to understand, oh, it can do this, it can do this. Well, it can take away, 50 minutes here from this task and 20 minutes there from that task. And you just find yourself freed up to do more exciting things all the time, right? There's this eradication of the monotonous, the boring, the routine. And if you're learning how to do it, and then there's this kind of opening up of more interesting, more higher cognitive tasks that I think human beings, generally speaking, enjoy doing more than the kind of the routine, boring day-to-day stuff. I see there's only a couple minutes left. Do you have any other points on this? Maybe looking forward in the next 3 to 5 years, not 5 to 10, but 3 to 5 years, how things are going to change, or have we already touched on those things, you think?
I mean, the two things that really interest me, I like going through thought experiments because, we're an agency, we've got an awful lot of developers on our staff, thinking what is the impact on our teams, the way we sell, the way we position ourselves. So thinking about if a pilot exists, what does that mean for you, your company, your industry? That's a really interesting process to go through. So if we had a pilot like that, where building a website, you could charge £50,000 if it could build any website. That would be amazing. People will be throwing money at you right now. It's not an easy task, but token costs are going to come down. Being able to run these maybe more on the edge, more locally to you, might be a possibility. But models are getting more intelligent and smaller, so it's not as difficult to run them anymore. Just going through that process of what challenges need to be fixed to be able to make that a reality, to really understand how far away that is, and then what the impact of that's going to be. Saying, an AI can build an entire website and platform for you. Our industry's dead. We no longer need to code because nothing exists. I don't think that's the case. As if you look at it, there's still going to have to be decisions made in the middle. You're still going to have to make decisions of feedback that the AI is giving you about what it wants to do, be able to make this to be able to decide which direction to take. So suddenly you become platform managers. And like you say, if the barrier to entry to build platforms and to run your thing, your local waste disposal company will now have a whole platform to run everything on. You'd have much more niche companies for exactly what you want. So Jira exists as a ticketing system, but now there'll be an equivalent of Jira, but for dentists. and it's already customized, exactly what dentists need. And then for every other industry as well. So I think it's going to remove the need of big companies, and you can have lots of small ones, which obviously gives a lot of opportunities, especially for engineers, where we understand how these things work. Being able to build these things, build these platforms, and to be able to take some of the market, there's so much opportunity there. So that is what I mainly try to think about, and where I think things are really interesting. So whenever you hear these scary things about taking your jobs, I'd say just literally try and plan out the process. What does it look like? What are the steps that's going to have to achieve for them to get rid of me as an employee? Then you suddenly realize where you can still add value at the end of that chain, and what the likelihood is, how long it's going to take to get to that chain as well. So therefore you've got this time for training, getting up to speed to, solidify what your career is going to look like in future. If things get really that well, we're talking about universal credit, mass unemployment, but the company deals with that because we're abundant in resource. Sounds great, but let's make sure that we're the people that can still work, still earn the money. So, we get the big houses if that is really the future that we end up in. But I think there's still a lot of skepticism about if that's really the direction we're going.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see in the next 10 years, maybe 15 years. We'll see what happens there.
I think it might be 5 or 6 to know the answer to that. But I think things will move very quick.
Yeah, things are moving too quickly. But it's exciting. And I think that's a perfect place to end this conversation. Glyn, thank you so much for coming on. I'll have your LinkedIn and your company's website up on the show notes. Is there any other place that you want people to check you out, reach out to you, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. I've got my video blog where you can see some webinars and some live conferences that I've talked at, glynrob.com, glynrob.com. It's interesting. If you look for the topics, if there's something that fancies that you looks interesting, feel free to watch it. That and everything about me is on there, so I'm an open book.
Perfect. I'll have that up on the show notes. Thanks again for coming on. It was great. Certainly started a couple ideas in my mind about how to work with my team maybe a little bit better, and some things to implement in the future. So thanks again for coming on and sharing your time and insights. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.